Hey, everybody. Welcome to a Friday night live show. Sorry that Nick and Travis couldn't join us. Nick is on vacation and Travis has another engagement. So you just have me today. Let's just dive first really quickly through some of the news articles that a lot of folks have been asking about recently. The first one is on some of the EV tax credit changes that are happening for 2024. We have a little bit more clarity, but I should caution that the IRS has not completely ironed out all of the details. The biggest thing that you should know about the new EV tax credit, however, is that it's not going to be a refundable credit like some people had hoped. And that means you still have to have a minimum tax liability to get the credit. So here's how it's going to change in 2024. The vehicles that will be eligible, which is a very tiny list now, it's been reduced by more than half because of some of the other changes we'll talk about. If the dealer has signed up for the program with the IRS, you can go into the dealer, you can provide your tax information to the dealer, and then you can get the tax credit right off the top of the vehicle. So it's going to come right off the purchase price. You won't have to finance as much. It's definitely going to be a big advantage. The tricky bit is, if you get to the end of the tax year and you do not have a $7,500 federal tax liability, which is entirely possible for people that have a big mortgage, have kids with child tax credits, etc., you will actually have to pay that tax credit back in tax liability due to the federal government. So if they've given you the $7,500 off there and your tax bill at the end of the year is only $1,000, then guess what? You actually owe the federal government $6,500. So big caution on that front. Also, the income tax rules still apply. So you still have to have an adjusted gross income under $150,000 for a single person, under $300,000 for a married couple in order to qualify for that tax treatment there. So if you suddenly get a bonus at the end of the year, you might actually end up hosing yourself with this particular change. Now, the reason that so few EVs qualify now is because of the design of the legislation. So it was designed to encourage North American manufacturing of EVs and batteries and EV components. So starting in January of 2024, 50% of the critical minerals to create the battery have to come from either the United States or one of 20 of our free trade allies, which include Australia, South Korea, etc. So the minerals could be mined in Australia, they could be processed in South Korea, and then the battery could be built in North America, and then it will qualify for the credit. 60% of the value of the battery itself must be built in North America. So that battery production has to be Canada, US, or Mexico. And it cannot include anything from China. And that's the big change for 2024, is that none of these materials, et cetera, none of the critical components can come from China or Russia or any other countries of geopolitical concern for the United States. So that's part of why these numbers have been really slashed dramatically. Some companies say that they expect to qualify at some point in time due to either some supplier changes that are needed or some supplier confirmations, I guess, that their components actually do qualify. So General Motors, for instance, expects their credit to come back at some point later this year. We may also see some credit changes on the Tesla side of things if they can change the sourcing of some of their components around. So be sure and keep all of that in mind if you are shopping for a new EV. Tommy is actually asking about our next news topic, which was the Hertz debacle. So yeah, the Hertz thing is kind of an interesting thing. Basically, here's how things went down. Hertz kind of was interested in EVs. In 2021, they wanted 20,000 EVs basically now, and they pulled some Teslas in. Honestly, they could have bought anything. Hertz was just really hurting for cars. They would have taken anything that was available, and what was available were a slight over inventory of some Tesla units at the time. That's how they ended up with them. And Hertz put a lot of them into their rideshare program. If you're an Uber driver or a Lyft driver, you can go rent a car from Hertz. There's unlimited mileage, there's unlimited damage waiver protection, etc. Seems like a good deal. Hertz is self-insured, so it turned out to be too good of a deal because these rideshare vehicles were treated worse than your average rental car. They had a lot of physical damage, a lot of bumper damage, door damage, things like that. And that is where Hertz was really losing their shirt on the EVs there. So Hertz finally decided to shift things out. They moved some of these vehicles into their rental car fleet, which is why you see so many really, really bad condition Teslas on the rental car lot at Hertz. That was the experience we definitely had when renting a Hertz Model Y up in Seattle recently. One of the doors just would not open, and that's not Tesla's fault. That's because the door was damaged, and then Hertz just rented it back out again. And that's part of why a lot of the Hertz EV fleet is really inexpensive. Frequently, if you go and rent a Hertz, the Model 3 and Model Y you're going to have a lot of miles on them. They're going to be pretty badly abused, but they are going to be really cheap. So if you are looking for a cheap used EV, you should be able to qualify for the used EV credit if you meet the income requirements and you get one of those EVs from Hertz. So definitely something to keep in mind if you're simply looking for a discount EV. Let's get to some of these other viewer questions here. So this is actually something, the question here is, can you please compare the Grand Highlander to the Kia Telluride or Hyundai Palisade as well as the bigger competition? We actually will be doing that in somewhat in the Kia Telluride video. Also, you can check out our Grand Highlander video where we definitely make a lot of those direct comparisons as far as size. The Grand Highlander was, of course, our 2024 SUV of the year, and I think for a very good reason. It is really, really big inside. It's priced well, and the fuel economy is fantastic. So be sure and check out those videos there. Let's dive into some of the plug-in hybrid questions here. What is our favorite plug-in hybrid system and why? RAV4 Prime versus Outlander versus Sportage versus XC60 versus i3 range extender. So Vlad, I have to say, I'm going to throw you a bit of a curveball here. The best plug-in hybrid system I have ever driven is one that we do not find in North America yet. It's actually a French plug-in hybrid system. It's the one that you find in the European market Peugeots and the Opels as well. 300 horsepower in a relatively small vehicle. It's a fantastic plug-in hybrid due to the way that it's designed and the way that they program the software. Unlike some plug-in hybrid systems out there, the system that we find in this European plug-in hybrid is what I would love to see in North America, where it functions in rear-wheel drive mode or all-wheel drive mode when in electric operation or in hybrid operation. The fuel economy was good, the power level was good, and it's easy to keep the vehicle in EV operation, even down to low states of charge, but you don't have to engage a specific mode for that. You control it with your right foot. Aside from that, I have to say that Toyota's RAV4 hybrid system, plug-in hybrid system, is absolutely fantastic. It is incredibly fuel efficient. It also drives in a very EV-like manner because it's an EV in those low speed situations. There's no mechanical transmission in the way. So it feels very much like a relatively slow EV. So it's going to feel kind of like a Nissan Leaf, I guess you could say, in terms of its performance when in EV mode. When it's in hybrid mode, it is definitely very, very swift. The contrast to that would be the Outlander plug-in hybrid system, which, as you know, we've had as a long-term vehicle here at Alex Nauto's Auto Buyer's Guide for a year now. Currently, it's up in the Pacific Northwest doing some snow testing with Travis. So be sure and stay tuned for that video set coming up soon. But the Outlander I like for some specific reasons, but I think that most people would be best served with something else. The Outlander has a teeny tiny third row, which I absolutely love. I think it's a fantastic idea to have an emergency third row. I wish it was removable, but as it is, I think it's fine. Also, the interior is really well done. The interior is basically all Nissan. It's the Nissan Rogue with a Mitsubishi logo on it, and that's a really good thing for the interior. The seats are comfortable, the design is attractive, the full LCD instrument cluster is well done, etc. Where the Outlander falls apart is really efficiency. It's less efficient on electricity and on gasoline versus the RAV4 Prime. Your results will obviously vary based on where you're driving it and how you're driving it. If you are in an area where you have relatively low speed limits on the highway, or you just drive conservatively, then it's going to be just fine. At 60 to 65 miles an hour on our recent road trip where Travis drove the Outlander all the way from Central California all the way up to Northern Oregon, he averaged about, as I recall, 30 miles per gallon, 31 miles per gallon, I think was approximately his average over that trip. That's a pretty decent highway standing. It is still about 20% below what you'll get in a RAV4 Prime, but fairly solid. If, however, you live in Texas and you live in an area with 75, 80, or even 85-mile-an-hour speed limits, then the fuel economy on that Outlander plug-in hybrid is really going to severely drop down, something that we noticed in our highway testing on that model. I would say the Sportage kind of splits the difference in a way. The Sportage has a mechanical all-wheel drive system, so it's intrinsically going to be less efficient in some drive modes than you find in an all-wheel drive system like the RAV4 Prime. But it does feel very traditional out on the road. So if you want a plug-in hybrid that feels like a regular car, has a regular mechanical all-wheel drive system, and that safety and security as a result, it's going to be a solid option. Also, the fuel economy is really quite good. Some people are offended by their plug-in hybrid system shifting like a regular car. So if that's of a problem to you or a concern to you, you don't want the Sportage or the Hyundai Kia systems because they're going to feel like that. When the vehicle is in EV mode, actually very similar feel, honestly, in the BMW and Mercedes plug-in hybrid systems, etc. When it's in EV mode, the power is going through the automatic transmission. So you're going to feel it shifting as you accelerate. You're also going to feel it shifting as you decelerate. So that is kind of a peculiar feel, but they are pretty efficient. The XC60 in the luxury segment is a fantastic plug-in hybrid system. And I have to say, Volvo has been arguably the most aggressive manufacturer when it comes to plug-in hybridization. Volvo has said that their future is all electric, but they're not trying to do this in a instant fashion. They're not saying we're going all electric right away. They are slowly dropping out full electric models, but they are making this electric promise and this electric transition in a very pragmatic way, which is something that I personally appreciate. Something that arguably we don't actually see at Toyota. They do some lip service to green things, and then they go and give us a wicked inefficient Tundra. But at any rate, back to Volvo. So what Volvo's been doing is they have not only been pushing out the plug-in hybrid system to practically everything in their lineup around the world. In the US, you can't get an XC40 plug-in hybrid, but in Europe, you can get the full suite of plug-in hybrids. And they have been continually evolving these plug-in hybrid systems, which I think is the more critical component here. So the XC60 plug-in hybrid you find today on the market is not the same one that launched back in 2016 with the XC90. They've had about 4 different battery packs, 2 different rear electric motors, 2 different gasoline engines, and a ton of different software and transmission generations in there as well. So the current system, 455 horsepower, solid fuel economy, solid performance in electric-only operation, etc. They've really made some significant strides there, and I think it shows. Volvo is currently selling more hybrids and plug-in hybrids as a percentage of their sales than any other company on earth right now. So we have the full electric brands, obviously up there, Tesla and Rivian, etc. Then next, as far as green progress, I would honestly argue it is Volvo, because currently in the US, everything they sell is at least a mild hybrid. We then find some hybrids around the world. In the US, we find plug-in hybrids, and they're selling about half their volume as plug-in hybrids. They're actually some of the best-selling plug-in hybrids around. And then we have their up-and-coming full EVs. So that's my thought there. Let's move along here to the next one. So why didn't Toyota put the plug-in hybrid system from the Lexus into the Grand Highlander? This is a good question. Toyota tends to be a conservative engineering company, speaking of engineering in Toyota. And I have a feeling that they're still just not quite sure where they want to go with their plug-in hybrid lineup. Obviously, they remain dedicated to hybrids. They remain dedicated to profitability. And some of that doesn't always work well when it comes to plug-in hybrids. And I think that's the main thing. There would have been a few compromises that I think are easier with the Lexus lineup. The first compromise is price. The plug-in hybrid would have been pretty expensive as a Grand Highlander. Maybe it wouldn't have fit with the Toyota logo. And the second thing is the added weight. Lexus chose not to make too many substantive changes to the platform, and that's part of why the plug-in hybrid system ends up deleting some seats. So it becomes a little bit less cargo and human practical as a result. So the payload figures go down. They didn't want to restructure the suspension and the payload figures too much in that model. And as a result, there is a bit of a practicality and practical compromise there as a result. Let's move on to news here for a moment. So let's go ahead and talk about this news item here. Dodge has finally released some pictures of the upcoming Charger. Now, I know this is a two-door vehicle. That's because Dodge is renaming the Challenger the Charger, go figure. They're also inserting a classic Dodge logo. You notice that illuminated logo right there in the middle. And we don't know too much else other than that for this particular vehicle. However, we know from insider sources, supplier statements, as well as basically Dodge's direct statements that there is going to be a gasoline Charger coming at some point later. Stellantis has said that they really want to be very forward with their shareholders and their board, et cetera, and this electrification strategy. So they've really been pushing hard at the marketing for the Charger EV. Trust me, there is going to be a gasoline Charger coming soon. It's going to be the best seller in the lineup, and there's still going to be a stupid fast model, whether it's gasoline or electric. Absolutely for sure. We know that. We just don't know the timing of all of them. We know that the factory has been shut down and to be retooled for the new vehicle. We know that they sold a ton of full-size sedans and coupes last year. So absolutely, they are not going to be giving up this volume. Unfortunately, we don't know the timing of the refresh. So we don't know what sedan is coming later. We expect to see one. We just don't know what it looks like necessarily. We know there's going to be probably a twin-turbo inline-six engine under this hood at some point soon. We are, however, also pretty sure that there isn't going to be a return to V8 muscle car land. So this is going to be an inline-six. Doesn't look like there's going to be any V8 going on under there. Moving back to questions here, Christopher is asking, do you think a used Jaguar I-Pace is a stupid idea? I would say it depends on the price. Honestly, most used cars, that's my default answer. Depends on what price tag you're looking at. I think the Jag was a good idea that was not well done at Jaguar internally. I think the car was fine. It wasn't marketed well. It wasn't priced well. If the I-Pace had been $30,000 less expensive, it would have been just fine. And I think really that's the price difference that they still would need to achieve to make the I-Pace something. This is one of those cases where they keep trying to make fetch happen, and there's just no way it's ever going to happen at this price point. It's just too expensive. It's just too small. There are quite simply better EVs out there on the new market. But on the used market, it's an entirely different question. So I would say if the used I-Pace is going for, less or the same price as a used XC40 Recharge, then I would go for the I-Pace. If it's going for a little bit more and you really like the Jag look, nothing wrong there. If it's going for a lot more than a used XC40, then I would say maybe you should take a look at some of the other EVs that are available. You'll be able to find a larger and more efficient EV, probably for less or the same price, or you could find something just as small for less or the same price. So let's move on here to Drew's question. What is the battery size or range threshold for a full plug-in hybrid where it makes sense to go full electric? That's an interesting question, actually. And this is going to be a somewhat controversial answer maybe, but I would argue that in a rational, pragmatic world, the battery size is actually going to be relatively small. A lot of people, for some reason, want their plug-in hybrid to go 100 miles on electric only range. And there is certainly a segment of the automotive buying public that demands that their plug-in hybrid perform exactly the same, whether it's in electric mode or in hybrid mode. But if we're being rational and pragmatic about this, it doesn't really make sense. A plug-in hybrid is ostensibly about gasoline mitigation, not gasoline replacement. So if you're going to drive 50 miles to work and that is your daily commute, and you very rarely do anything else, why not just get an EV? You can do that all electric if you want to. If you are simply concerned about reducing your gasoline consumption, you want to lower that down, but you want the safety blanket, then get a plug-in hybrid with a small battery. If, a third of your trip or a quarter of your trip is in gasoline mode, then why does it matter when that gasoline gets consumed? Whether it starts at the beginning or is at the end or whatever, it doesn't matter too much. You're simply shifting your energy sources around. So that's my thought there. Let's see here. So Slow is asking, would love to hear thoughts on the Edison Motors plug-in hybrid pickup truck conversion kits they've recently announced, as well as your thoughts on the company as a whole. I would love to see some of these plug-in hybrid kit companies work more with mainstream car companies, which is not something that we seem to be seeing here. As it is, the sacrifice is definitely going to be payload and efficiency. There's also going to be some question about warranty support long-term, with these companies and what happens if they go bankrupt, et cetera, as we've seen with so many other conversion companies. That would be my general concern there. We do see some plug-in hybrid conversions working relatively well with fleets out there. So Pacific Gas and Electric, for instance, has a decent number of converted plug-in hybrid vehicles in their fleets that seem to have worked okay for them. There is just that efficiency concern, which is kind of my efficiency concern with the upcoming Ram REV extended range EV, whatever they want to call this thing. It's a plug-in hybrid. But efficiency is logically going to be the trade-off there. So if you're not going to be charging it on a regular basis, you're going to be just better off with something like an F-150 hybrid. Matthew Calloway is asking here, why do you think Hyundai Kia will add a metal battery shield to their EVs similar to Tesla? Or do we think they seem too vulnerable given how expensive battery replacements are? I don't know if that is necessarily a rational requirement for their batteries in their vehicles. It sort of depends on what you expect out of the EV and the general design of the EV platform. So in an EV where the battery is a core structural element to the vehicle, a battery shield is not just there for protection, it's also there for the structure of the battery pack. If the structure of the unibody is handled by a different component, by the rest of the unibody, then the underbody shield is less important because you can still protect the battery in other ways. We don't have any good evidence that this is anything to worry about in the Hyundai Kia EVs. If you're rock crawling your Kia, I would argue you picked the wrong Kia because they're pretty low. They're pretty average as far as vehicle height. All of the testing that I have seen from some independent testing in Europe, as well as Hyundai and Kia's own internal testing, make of that what you will, of course, that it's their internal testing. Typical road hazards are not going to be an issue for the battery pack penetration. If you are attacking an obstacle in your car and you're driving along, remember that the front of the vehicle where the motor is, etc., that's going to hit the object first. So then you're going to kind of, have the vehicle right up on the object. So, vehicle slamming down on an object right on the battery pack is not really as big of an issue, which is generally why we only find underbody shields in regular cars in very off-road oriented vehicles, your Jeeps, your Broncos, your Wranglers, etc. Those are the ones that have full underbody protection over all of the critical driveline components and the gas tank. A decent number of vehicles out there have with some nod to off-roading, will have a bit of an underbody shield over maybe the oil pan on the engine, but then they leave a lot of the other driveline components unshielded. Even something like a Wrangler is not going to shield necessarily the universal joints and the drive shafts as it goes rearward. And a lot of the less off-road capable vehicles don't do any sort of gas tank shielding. So for some of those similar reasons there, I would say. Moving along here, let's go to our super chat. So thanks for dropping the super chat there, Anton. So what do we think of the lack of updates and redesigns from Audi over the past few years? Is it related to the VW Dieselgate scandal rather? Any news on the A4 and A5? I have actually been wondering what Audi is up to, just like you have, to be honest. I think that Audi has dropped the ball a little bit on especially their infotainment software work. So even some of the newer Audi refreshes and redesigns, they used to be at the forefront of German infotainment design. And I would argue that is now BMW and Mercedes. Feature-wise, I would say Mercedes is probably the leader. Look and feel and driver interaction, software environment, just the UI, I would say BMW is probably the leader there for me at the moment. We don't have any good information or intel as to what Audi is up to next on the A4 and A5. Hopefully we'll be hearing something a little bit later this year. We also don't know all of the reasons why Volkswagen and the Volkswagen Group seems to be a little bit behind on some of the typical refresh cycles, but I would suspect it's less to do with Dieselgate and more to do with some of their push towards electrification, and some of the model creep that we've seen at Volkswagen and Audi. You'll notice that they've really exploded the number of models they have around the world. Especially in Europe, we don't see all of the Volkswagen brands available in the United States, but in Europe, we have a ton more than we find in the US. And some of this could just be US market specific. Volkswagen, and to a lesser extent, Audi, they've had real troubles over the last few decades gaining traction in the North American market, something that I've honestly never quite understood because I think their products are attractive and interesting. But they just have had trouble selling them to Americans. And I think that does play into some of what you're seeing here. So moving along here, do we think the RamCharger PHEV will be in other Stellantis vehicles like the Grand Cherokee or Grand Wagoneer? The answer here is yes. We know, according to some of their dealership presentations that have leaked out, that we should be expecting a Grand Wagoneer with the RamCharger's plug-in hybrid system. That's quite logical because the Grand Wagoneer has always been slated for a full electric variant. And by all indications, the frame in the Ram Electric is more similar to the frame that we find in the Wagoneer and Grand Wagoneer. The reason for that is the independent suspension. So Wagoneer and Grand Wagoneer have different needs than a pickup truck. So the frame has only a passing resemblance to a regular Ram 1500 frame. The front suspension is relatively similar. The rear suspension is completely different in the Wagoneer because of the independent suspension and the packaging changes, etc. Because of the battery insertion, it's more likely, although we don't know all the details, but it's more likely that the new STLA electric frame architecture in the RamCharger is actually more similar to what we find in the Wagoneer, which will make that integration a bit easier. Now, on the Grand Cherokee front, no, it is unlikely to go in there. The Grand Cherokee and Grand Cherokee L, those appear to be getting the 4xe plug-in hybrid system. So different system for different needs for different customers. We know that there is going to be a full electric version of the STLA midsize platform, the unibody SUV platform, which underpins the Grand Cherokee L, and the next generation Durango. So we know that there's going to be a battery electric version of that, but the details are not overly specific. That's still going to be a unibody vehicle. So the plug-in hybrid system is going to be based on the gasoline architecture and gasoline frame unibody design. There probably is going to be a slightly different floor pan design for the full electric version, but expect it to be, I hate to use the phrase compromised, but that's probably the best way to describe it. Expect the electrification efforts from Stellantis for a while here to be relatively compromised. So Grand Cherokee and Durango electric, as well as Charger electric, when you look at those bodies in white, there's a transmission tunnel there. And the only reason that transmission tunnel is there is because there's going to be an ICE version, a regular gasoline version. And it made sense in the electric model to not change that critical crash structure. It's pretty expensive to design a crash structure in a new car. So to avoid that expense, they're just going to use that same sort of crash structure stamping in the electric version, which could be a bit of a problem as far as packaging efficiency. So interior space to exterior volume, etc. We'll have to see how that really goes long term. Let's see here. Moving on here. Stefan's asking about the relevance of the Mini brand with their new models coming. Do you think there's still room for the brand? That's an interesting philosophical question, I would say, about Mini and Mini in the United States. I am surprised that, well, maybe I shouldn't be surprised. Part of me is surprised that practical European vehicles don't get much traction in the United States. This is a perennial problem here. Anytime a European car brand has tried to bring something logical and sensible to the European mind to America, it seems to go nowhere. And I'd call Smart that. I'd say the Fiat product line was certainly like that, the Fiat 500, etc., the Minis. Americans just are not interested in something that is small and somewhat premium and expensive. And if you're going to be building the small thing in Europe, and importing it to the United States, it's going to be on the expensive side versus building it in Mexico or somewhere in Latin America. That's just the nature of this. That said, I think that Mini has always been in an okay position as far as logical business case, because there really aren't very many Mini standalone stores, actually none that I can think of. They're always coordinated with BMW dealers and BMW service departments. On an architectural level, every Mini is related to a BMW. So the X1, the X2, the 2 Series Grand Coupe, etc. And that helps reduce their production costs. So on that front, I think they're just fine as far as the future goes. Will they have a relatively limited role and not the larger role that they anticipated? Probably. Moving on, Elliot is asking, what about Stellantis pulling out of the auto shows? I actually think this is just fine. I have often questioned the value to a manufacturer of some of these auto shows. Manufacturers, when I go to the auto show and when the rest of the media go to the auto show, it's not the same auto show that you're going to see as a consumer. So I should be really clear that Stellantis corporate is pulling out of auto shows. This does not mean that there won't be dealers present at auto shows. So when you go to your local auto show in San Francisco or Seattle or Houston or whatever, the vast majority of the things on the show floor are from local dealers. The people on the show floor are from local dealers as well, by and large. Sometimes they're from third-party marketing companies that are supporting car companies there. But by and large, the presence is largely a local dealership thing. And that makes sense because in your region, you might be cross-shopping car A and car B, and you can go to the auto show, and those people can actually help you later with that car if you want to. You can get a business card, you can go see the dealer, and you can go buy whatever you want. Car companies launching things at an auto show for me, for other people to go dive in, honestly, it's an enormous waste of money as far as I'm frankly concerned. I don't know why. If I never went to an auto show again, I would be totally fine. They would be days in my life that I would get back and I could just stay at home because everybody's crawling over the same car. You just can't make good content out of it. What Stellantis seems to be doing instead is they seem to be doing more private briefings on their products. They're still doing drive programs. So I'm going to be driving the new Ram 1500 in a few weeks here. So I'm not concerned about it at all. It's just a logical thing to do as far as I'm concerned. And if it means that the company is more profitable and they can invest money somewhere else or make better products, I'm totally fine with that. So that's my thought there. Here we go. So someone's asking here, when do we drive the new Toyota Camry? Expect that to be spring or summer of this year. I will be driving the new Land Cruiser and the Lexus GX very soon in a few weeks. So be sure and stay tuned for those. Based on the release trajectory, Camry should come a few minutes after that. So that's where I am there. And then Drew, CX-70, I have not seen it yet, but that is on my calendar somewhere. And I will be seeing the CX-70. Hopefully I'm allowed to talk about this, but probably fine. I'm actually seeing the CX-70 next week. Don't know when I can show you the CX-70, but stay tuned and make sure and turn your notifications on for that CX-70. I'm really curious about it. I will say on the record that my expectation is that it's going to be mainly shrunken CX-90. I'm hoping that there are a few more premium touches based on the positioning of the vehicle as more of a personal luxury crossover rather than a family three-row. So I would love it if Mazda put a few more premium touches in the CX-70, even though the number is a little bit lower. Here was an interesting question that I saw here from Brad. Here we go. Brad's asking my opinion on steer-by-wire systems. So far, steer-by-wire honestly is the answer to the question that so far I have never heard anybody ask. Especially the Lexus steer-by-wire system and the Cybertruck steer-by-wire system. I just don't understand why they exist. Why any R&D effort was involved in this process. Some of the claim is that this will enable fully autonomous vehicles at some point in the future. Well, bully for that. If that's the case, then lovely. But why do we need it now? Because if you buy your Cybertruck now, the reality is that's not going to be a robo-taxi in its lifetime. That ship is going to be way later. Ditto for the RZ. So in some ways, if you buy a car with a steer-by-wire system now, you're just helping that company do research and development on steer-by-wire for some future product at some point in the future. I think that's really how it goes. When I was talking to the Lexus engineers who designed the steer-by-wire system in the Lexus RZ, it was kind of a circular conversation. Why did you design the system? We designed it because of this, X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, yeah, but what problem does it solve? Like, what problem did you as a car manufacturer identify based on customer feedback where a customer said, what I really want is a steering wheel that's not attached to the wheels? And nobody could really come up with an answer to that question. So I fail to see the logic here. There are theoretically some benefits in driver isolation in a more infinitely variable ratio. But I mean, all that really means is that, you turn the steering wheel this much instead of this much. And outside of people with limited mobility issues in their wrists, I just don't see too much of a benefit there. So yeah, I don't know. That's a big question. John is asking us, have I driven the new Kona EV? Yes, I have. So be sure and go over to the channel, dig around in the videos. There is a first drive video of the new Kona EV up there. I was not able to drive the standard range Kona EV, but I was able to drive the extended range model with the bigger battery pack. So be sure and check that out. Bottom line, it feels an awful lot like the Kona EV as far as its driving nature, with some of the tweaks from the Ioniq 5 jammed into it, and a lot of the Ioniq 5's styling as far as the two-screen setup and the exterior style changes jammed into the Kona EV. I really like the idea of the Kona EV, and I like it more that Hyundai is passing along the lease credit. So I noticed you're leasing. That's going to be a good way to get that Kona, because you will get the tax credit on it. Because of its assembly location, however, you will not get the tax credit if you buy a Kona EV. So certainly keep that one in mind. Let's see here. Moving along to the CX-70. Yep, officially launches on January 30th. So that's the date that we've already heard there. Trenton is asking, when will we drive the new Chevy Traverse? I'm hoping that will be soon. I saw it in person maybe about 6 months ago or so. So the timing is approaching here that we should get to the drive program probably in early spring. And that kind of goes along with Krishna's question here, which is about the GMC Acadia. I don't see reliability being too far off the current Acadia. Good data is a little difficult to find here, and this is where we're going to start diving into some controversial subjects. But we don't have a great deal of reliability on new models, because new models are, by their very definition, new. So all you can go on is track record, and not every car company has a solid reliability reputation when it comes to launching new models. I would say GM's new model reliability issues generally center around software, and the Acadia and the Traverse are going to have a new generation infotainment system. It's related to the ones that we find in the Silverado and Sierra, and of course the Blazer EV. The hardware, it appears to be more closely related to Blazer EV's hardware, which may be a bit problematic. Details are sketchy on that one, however. So as long as it's not related to simply the EV functionality side of the infotainment system, I would expect it to be similar to Sierra and Silverado. If it is a complete redesign underneath the skin, then it could be more similar reliability-wise to Blazer. But mechanically, I don't see there to be any problem there. The 2.7-liter turbo from GM has been pretty reliable. The engine's related to that. The transmission has been around for some time as well. So Drew is asking us, which OEM has the highest average transaction price? I would say Jaguar Land Rover actually is definitely up there. If we're simply talking conglomerates, it's probably going to be JLR. Because Rolls-Royce and Bentley are owned by larger conglomerates, and so that kind of drives down the average transaction price. Obviously, your Rolls Royces, your Bentleys are going to be super duper high. But yes, Jaguar Land Rover has very high average transaction prices because as a brand, Jaguar is not targeting the same customers that other car companies are targeting with their product lines. They're targeting a much higher level of customer, I guess you could say there. And if we take a look, for instance, I had it pulled up here earlier. If I can find... Oh, actually, I ended up deleting it. But you can actually wander around some of the average transaction price research that like Cox Automotive does. They do a regular average transaction price survey out there, and you can see who's selling what and which products are at what ATP. It's kind of interesting because conventional wisdom, especially enthusiast conventional wisdom, doesn't always match reality. For instance, conventional wisdom, especially in a lot of very traditional Toyota circles, I guess you could say, is that the Korean manufacturers only sell cheap products and they're horrible or whatever. But average transaction price wise, that is not the case. Kia especially has a pretty high average transaction price in North America, even though they don't sell things that are as expensive as Toyota does. So when you take a look at what Kia is selling, they're selling a lot of high-end trim Tellurides, a lot of high-end trim Sportages and Sorrentos, etc. Those products skew heavily towards the top-end trims, something that we cannot say about Highlander, for instance. So Highlander actually skews towards the lower-end trims when you take a look at the average transaction price data. So interesting thing there. Moving along to Drew's question here again. Any plans for driving the new 2024 Lincoln Nautilus? I have some feelers out to Lincoln on that. I don't know when it's coming down the line. I haven't heard anything on dates, so my guess would be probably again spring. It seems like a lot of the products that we're waiting on might have drive programs in spring and early summer here. Bots here saying he's picking up a Civic hatch for 2023 tomorrow. I have to say thanks because he was so set in a Sonata Accord until we saw the title about them being basically a budget Audi Sportback. Congratulations on getting the sport hatch there. So no Type R. Let us know why no Type R. Did you decide that the Type R was just too expensive? Curious. So let us know why you chose that particular trim. Moving along, let's go ahead and pick up one of the other questions I saw here earlier in the chat here. Let's go back through here. Sorry, everybody. Maybe I'll have to pass on that question because something came up and now I have completely lost track of my thoughts here. Here we go. Asking about the tax credit here. So this is correct. So the last EV guidance that we had from the IRS, it was contained in a very, very large document they had, and there was a press release, press conference about this tax credit issue here, that yes, you will have to pay it back on your tax returns. They didn't answer this directly. They answered it indirectly by confirming that it is not a refundable credit. So all they're letting you do is get the tax credit early, but because it's not refundable, that means you have to have that minimum tax liability. So that tax liability will follow you when you file your taxes. That's the critical thing to know about the EV tax credit. A lot of folks had hoped or assumed that it would be converted into a refundable credit because that would give consumers more certainty, but that is not how the legislation was written. So if we go back to the way the legislation was written in the first place, and you take a look at its intent and its structure, that's the basic format, basically the way that it was created. Let's move along here. Nathaniel is asking about Consumer Reports and videos. I would argue that we don't have a video debunking Consumer Reports. We have a video talking about Consumer Reports and understanding their data. And that's really the key thing here. We have a lot of folks asking about Consumer Reports data, so I'll mention it because people are asking about it. But since you're asking about it, I'll address this part of it as well, which is Consumer Reports data is useful as long as you understand what it is and what it is not. Consumer Reports does not have a big data set anymore. Consumer Reports data is extraordinarily valuable when we're talking about the models that they have good data and good numbers of vehicles for. Unfortunately, it is not a good data set for comparing brands against one another necessarily when we're talking about low volume brands or about brands that are not represented well in their survey. And that represented well in their survey is a critical thing. So as I said before, this is sort of a circular argument here. So Consumer Reports largely surveys people interested in reliability, because if you're subscribing to Consumer Reports, you're probably interested in reliability. So you buy a car based on Consumer Reports, you report your car because you're a subscriber still, you buy another car because Consumer Reports ranked that car X. So in this reality, it's a bit of an echo chamber, and that is the important thing to keep in mind. When you look at the holes in their data set, they're they're ascribing reliability numbers to certain brands with large gaps in their data. For instance, Dodge gets relatively decent scores in some of their reliability metrics, but they're basing that number on the lowest volume car in their 3-car lineup. It's not a very big lineup. And very limited data on that one car. So does that mean Dodge is reliable? No, I wouldn't say that. It just means that we just don't know based on that data. So that's the disclaimer that I would put on all of that. That explanation is too long to use in many videos, so that's why oftentimes we skip that a bit. So Zachary here is asking about a next generation XC40 Recharge, Polestar 4, powertrain expectations, etc. We don't have too much information on a next generation XC40. The big question will be, is the XC40 going to remain on Volvo's CMA platform that has been shared by other Geely enterprises, but it was primarily a Volvo platform, or is it going to move to the global conglomerate platform, which is what we find underneath the Polestar 4? There are a wide variety of rumors out there, and I think it's largely going to depend on whether or not that small Volvo segment is going to maintain plug-in hybridization or not. SPA 2, which is what EX90 and Polestar 3 are built on, is still a dual-purpose platform. So far, we only know of electric vehicles being built on that platform, but it is a generation of SPA 2, of the original SPA platform, SPA 1. So when you look at the structure of the vehicle underneath the body in white, it is very clearly also designed for ICE platforms to coexist in there. Whether or not we will see one, we don't know. Most likely what I would expect is if EX90 sales don't just skyrocket off and fully replace XC90, that we will see some generation of XC90 built on this platform or a related platform at some point in the future. So I would say the Ouija board reading is a little bit tricky there, and it will depend on how some of the sales in these models go. XC40 has been selling really quite well in North America as well as in Europe. So I would expect it to get another generation in gasoline format because of that. Let's see here. This is actually a really good question here. So when is the US going to start accepting side view and matrix headlights just like the EU? Side view cameras, that's more difficult to say. I actually hope they never come because side view cameras are horrible. Just like rear view cameras, horrible, especially as people get older or people with slower focusing eyes. A lot of people don't realize this, but a mirror is not like a camera, like a screen. If I'm focusing on this camera versus focusing on my laptop versus focusing 500 feet down the road, it takes my eyes a while to adjust to that focal length distance. If I'm looking in a mirror, like a rear view mirror or a side view mirror, that actually does not require much focal length change because you're still focusing on that object way back there. The way that mirrors work, you're not focusing on the surface of the mirror. That image, you're focusing actually way back there, 500 feet, 1,000 feet, 2,000 feet behind you or in front of you, et cetera, wherever the mirror is pointing. If you are focusing on a camera and then an LCD, you are actually focusing on that image surface, that that LCD right there that's only 3-4 feet away from you. And that focal length time is definitely something to consider and to keep in mind, which is part of why heads-up displays are a driver aid, because that distance difference in time that it takes your eyes to focus on a heads-up display versus an instrument cluster, it actually is a difference, because the heads-up display again is a reflected image, so the distance between that display and your eye is actually further away than a full LCD instrument cluster in the dashboard. That's part of why it's a little bit more eye-friendly. Matrix headlights, however, I do hope those come soon. We know that the legislation to allow them has already passed. Now it's up to the rule-making bodies and for NHTSA to come up with rules and tests and things like that and standards around them. My guess is that it's not going to be till probably the 2026 model year that we would actually see Matrix headlights in the US. Some folks have put that date closer to 2028. Some have said 2025. I tend to believe the 2026 guidelines there as being just a little bit closer. Let's move on here to what do we think? Toyota has way too many SUVs in their lineup by Canada 12. I would say that's a hard statement to make when Toyota is one of the largest sellers of vehicles in North America. Clearly, they're just designing what their customers want, and their customers seem to want wide varieties of different SUVs in different shapes, whether that's a GX and a Land Cruiser and a Sequoia and a this and a that. It seems to be that Toyota cannot make enough SUVs. So, that's my thought there on that one. Moving on to Drew, thanks for the super chat here. Why haven't many OEMs copied Hyundai Kia's blind spot view monitor camera in the instrument cluster? Perplexing. I would say it's mainly because of the style of blind spot view camera that they have in the side. So this is part of also why we see Tesla imitating the Hyundai Kia system, but not really faithfully copying it. So Tesla's cameras are primarily designed for their object recognition system and lane lines in the sides, which is why the image is not really useful. It's not really high on the side of the vehicle, you'll notice if you've been driving a Tesla. Also, the video quality, especially at night, is not great on those side view Tesla screens. The Hyundai Kia system actually uses a slightly different style camera that has more of an angle out towards the side. So it actually required that camera to be designed like that from the very beginning. Possibly slightly more expensive is part of the reason here. Software changes also seems to be some of the rationale. Other car companies that have 360-degree camera systems, they're mainly focusing down on the surface that you're driving on for that 360-degree camera view. So it's just a different camera and camera view required to make that system function there. Let's move along to Brad here. Brad's asking or saying, I would like to see current EV models on the road in 40 years. It seems unreasonable to expect a manufacturer to prove. I'm not sure what they're proving there. So Daniel, maybe finish that thought. Let us know here. Moving back along, someone was asking about some aftermarket steering devices. We lovely if people test those. I have somewhat less interest really in testing open devices like that from Kona AI. They haven't been designed with the vehicle in mind. A lot of people put way too much confidence in driver assist systems as it is, even from companies that have designed them right from the factory to begin with. So, I have very little interest in actually testing those systems, mind you. So moving along to some of the other questions that we have here. Be sure and post them down there if you have particular questions down there as well. When will we drive a Cybertruck and compare with the F-150 and the Silverado? That is a good question. My bet would be as soon as we can get one on Turo. Obviously, Tesla does not let the media test their cars independently from a manufacturer-supplied fleet, so we don't have that there. Some of the Teslas that we have tested have either been viewers that have let us test their cars, or we've had to buy the Teslas. So we bought a Model 3, for instance. We've rented Model Ys, tested viewer Model Ys. Travis currently owns a Model 3 up in the Seattle area. So he has that there available for testing as well. Cybertruck, it is a little bit pricey, so I don't see us buying one of those. Our next long-term car, we actually already know it's hanging out in the port. We don't know if it's been unloaded today so far. We're actually getting a Grenadier, something that maybe was a little bit more of a passion project of mine than others. I know that last time we asked folks out there to vote for a long-term vehicle, they voted for the Outlander, and then nobody has watched much Outlander content. So go figure. So this time we decided to go in a different direction, and amongst ourselves, we just decided it would be kind of cool to try something very different from a new manufacturer. So we ordered an Ineos Grenadier. It's their sort of Land Rover Defender imitation product. It landed in port yesterday. They haven't told us which port that is, because it could be Port Wainami in California, or it could be a port on the East Coast. Just don't know yet. Hopefully it will be packed up and shipped along to its dealer at some point soon. So soon, maybe. Let's move along here. Someone's asking about separate brake lights and turn signals. Separate is always the way to go here. Moving along to some of these other questions in rapid fire, because some of these could be easy. Kana's asking, you mentioned a few times over the different hybrid systems, which one is best on highway? I know there are multiple types. There are actually multiple types that are going to be the best on the highway. Any of the hybrid systems that combine smaller displacement, naturally aspirated Atkinson cycle engines, I know that's a long description, and any system that is parallel hybrid is going to be great on the open highway, especially designed for those higher speeds. So think Toyota and Ford hybrid systems using their planetary power split system. Those allow an infinite ratio spread effectively between engine and wheels, and they allow almost direct mechanical powering of the wheels. The Hyundai and Kia hybrid systems, the Volvo plug-in hybrid systems also perform pretty well out on the open highway. And that's because they have pretty efficient engines. They have regular mechanical transmissions with a good ratio for highway travel, and they have other fuel-saving technologies bundled with them to improve the highway fuel economy. So all of those, I think, are actually a pretty good one. Moving along here, we have Mike asking, what's the opinion of Chinese EVs coming to the US? This is a really good question, and I would say this is probably pretty controversial, especially my answer. I honestly hope we could get some Chinese EVs in the US for a few reasons. The first one is going to be, yes, even though this is giving over a portion of the market to China, and that obviously is going to have an impact on US manufacturing and ally manufacturing, et cetera, there is the promise of having a cheap car in America. So if I suddenly were elected master of the tariff structure tomorrow, I would say zero tariffs on any Chinese imported cars of any description that meet crash safety standards, that meet emission standards, that are priced under about $25,000. Because honestly, nobody is competing in that market. And that is a logical, practical market that consumers need in America. If you're looking for an affordable car that's new, relatively reliable, etc., affordable being the key thing, you don't have very many options in the US. And Chinese EVs and Chinese vehicles, period, I think could fill that niche. If we take a look at Europe, for instance, you can get an MG, which is made by SAIC, in Europe. You can get a hybrid one or a plug-in hybrid one for effectively $10,000 less than a RAV4 or CRV. That means reasonable family-sized vehicle for $25,000. Is it going to be cheap? Yes. Is it going to be questionable in some areas? Absolutely. Is the carpet going to wear through quickly? You betcha. But it's also going to be very inexpensive. And affordable transportation is essential for people that need affordable transportation. That's kind of my pet peeve, I guess you could say, currently in the US, is that we see a huge change in the demographics of new car buyers and the demographics of car transaction pricing, I guess you'd say. The era of graduating high school and buying a car, that left decades ago. The era of graduating college and buying a new car, that left a solid decade or two ago as well. The average transaction price of a new car today is near $50,000. There are fewer options than ever under $20,000. And that means that if you graduate high school and you want a car, You graduate college and you want a car, you're buying a used car. You're not buying that new car anymore. By and large, demographically, new cars are being purchased by upper income earners, single family home owning suburbanites. And we definitely see that in the used car market now as well. We don't see affordable, reliable transportation that is mechanically simple available on the used car market because the new car buyer is not buying that. The new car buyer is a, by and large, wealthy suburban dwelling person or family or household, etc. And they're buying those kinds of vehicles that will then end up with the next generation of customer. We really see that when we see the growth of the German luxury brands. We see the growth of Tesla as a luxury brand, to be honest. Those cars are going to end up on the used car market, and some person is going to have to buy them, and the repair costs on those vehicles is going to be higher. So we see this erosion of affordable to repair transportation, etc. And I would argue that cheap and cheerful EVs from China and cheap cars generally from China that could focus on that lower end of the car market, they actually could be the solution to that. But there is relatively little political will in that. But moving along, let's move back over to Drew here. CX-50 hybrid, we don't know when that's coming. We haven't heard much of a rumor there. Who knows what's going on? Mazda and Toyota still say it's going to happen. It's still being built in the joint venture factory. We just don't know all the details. It could be that Toyota can't ramp production of the hybrid system up fast enough. Garrett's supporting the decision on the Ineos, so thanks about that. Do you remember why you never reviewed a Dodge Dart? I actually don't remember why I never ended up with a Dart. The Dart wasn't bad. And honestly, oddly, I've driven Fiat Tipos or Typos or whatever you're supposed to call it in Europe, and they're just fine. There's nothing wrong with the Dart. It was that cheap and cheerful thing. It never gained traction in the market. There was seemingly little viewer interest, and sometimes if there's no viewer interest, I just don't bother seeking a car out. So that happens. CES seems to have many new EV companies showing prototype every year. Do you think it's a good or bad, a net good to spread the market, dealer network, blah, blah, blah? I'm always interested by what goes on at CES and never dribbles down to the actual car market. A lot of non-US market things are shown at CES because CES has such a large international presence. So it's difficult to divine what that could mean with the US market, theoretically, in the future. So thanks, Zach, for the super chat here. He's asking a question here. He has a daily drives a 2023 Compass with 2 years left on the lease. As a car guy, he's thinking about his next car in the subcompact class. He would love something that's a bit more fun or engaging to drive. Any suggestions? That is an interesting one, especially if you're leasing. If you're leasing, you might, 2 years left. I don't know what's going to be out in 2 years, but I would say if you were looking right now, I'm actually personally intrigued by the Hornet. We haven't done a full video on the Hornet yet. That should be coming over the next few months here. But the Hornet plug-in hybrid is a surprising amount of fun. And on the lease, I wouldn't worry too much about it, especially if you're already leasing a Stellantis product. Hopefully you know what you're getting into there. And it is the fun to drive thing, I think, is the most interesting part there. The interior is really well done. You can thank Alfa Romeo for that. The engagement is there. Again, you can thank Alfa Romeo for that. Also on that front in that category, I would suggest taking a look at a lease of maybe an Audi Q3, a Volvo XC40. They're awfully fun in that similar size category as well. Other fun to drive things that we've had recently, if you want to spend less and maybe buy something, this may come out of left field, but honestly, a Chevy Trax is a really fun to drive, cheap car. It's affordable. It's fun to drive. You can get the RS trim with the wide tires. That's definitely a hoot and a half. Follow up down there with any suggestions if you've thought of those. So moving along here, someone's saying or asking, do you think we'll see more pure serial hybrids in the US? That is an interesting question. I would not be surprised because by and large, from what we see now, Americans and car shoppers more generally either don't seem to understand the relative efficiency or inefficiency problems of a serial hybrid system, or they just don't care. And so, whenever I talk to BMW i3 range extender owners or Outlander plug-in hybrid owners, and we start moving on to efficiency, I will get either blank stares or they just don't care, and which is fine. I mean, if you don't care about it, then that's totally rational. But the not understanding part, somehow I have more of a problem with, and I want to make them understand, but it doesn't matter if they don't care. Serial hybrids are always going to be less efficient in some of these high torque demand situations or higher speed situations just by their very nature. But they do give you that electric car driving experience. The Outlander drives like an electric SUV because by and large, at most speeds, it is an electric SUV with the backup plan. The downside is just going to be that efficiency, which is exactly why the Chevy Volt was not an electric car with the backup plan. It actually spent much more of its time in parallel hybrid mode because that's the best way to do it. But GM knew that that's not what customers wanted, so they marketed it super hard as a EV with a backup plan, as a serial hybrid. And yes, there is a serial hybrid mode in the Volt. It just doesn't use it an awful lot. It actually spends most of its time in a Prius-like hybrid operating mode. So, but that's fine by me because it's actually totally fine. Daniel's saying China's doing an end run on the US tariff system by building cars in Mexico. I mean, that's definitely true, but the same is said of all of the tariffs internationally. That's why Mercedes is getting around the chicken tax. They're building their vans in the US. Volvo is getting around the tariffs by building their Volvos in the US, even though they're predominantly owned by a Chinese company, etc. That's just how it is. And I would argue that, you're still winning in an essence. It's not, they're not being built in China and the batteries can't come from China. So here we go. Brad, the rest of his question here, he would like to see current EV models on the road in 40 years. Is it unreasonable to expect manufacturers provide access to new battery packs 20 years down the road? This is going to be a serious question. And this goes back to what I was saying earlier about my concern about the changing demographics of new car buyers. This is a new car focused channel, obviously a new car focused outlet, so I don't always talk about this. But when I hear people talking about, we don't have enough charging in this US for people to buy EVs that live in apartments, my honest answer, which sounds, flippant, but is not, is new car buyers don't care about that, because new car buyers, from Nissan Versa to Porsche 911, all the EVs included, by and large, high 90%. Yes, there are some apartment dwellers, but high 90% are not. The most EV shoppers, EV buyers out there live in a single family home. They have a high income. They can afford to install a charger at home. I don't know anybody out there that is seriously going, can I afford a $65,000 dollar EV, but I can't afford a $1,000 charger? If that describes you, then you have some screwed up priorities, buddy. Maybe you shouldn't buy the $65,000 EV. Maybe you should buy a cheaper car, and then you could afford the home charger. So in that world, this is not being thought of, because new cars are being sold to new car buyers, and that's what the new car buyer looks like. The problem is the most cars in the US are bought by used car shoppers. Every year, about 70,000 cars, 70 million cars transact in the US. Only about 14 million of them on a good year are new. The rest of them are used cars. And that is a valid problem, valid consideration for a used car shopper in 20 years is, what's going to happen to my battery? Am I going to be able to buy a new one? Is there going to be an aftermarket company where I can buy a battery? Can I buy a newer battery? Am I stuck with the old battery? Like, how's that going to work? And unfortunately, we just don't know the answer to any of those questions yet. Moving along here quickly, we have, why did Honda leave the partnership with GM? The partnership was never hugely extensive, and it never seemed to indicate too many more products than what we already knew about. There was a rumor that there may be a third EV, but I think that they just let this run its course. Honestly, GM is having enough troubles building their own EVs. I think Honda didn't need that. Moving along here, ICE cessation mandates seem to be rolling back in many jurisdictions. Do we know why this is occurring? In most jurisdictions, like in California, this is the one I have the most knowledge about, The mandates have always been rolling targets. If you think that California's ZEV mandate is their first, you would be wrong. This is actually their fourth, and the date keeps changing and changing and changing, and there are lots of exceptions. So these dates will just keep moving, to be perfectly honest. And that's a rational thing because they're there to encourage the market to go in a direction, but nobody so far that we have seen has put in any super hard and fast rules that have actually, draconian slashed things in that way. There are some concerns that maybe California will actually be firm this time, but I'm not clear how rational that concern is, since it's such a faraway goalpost in reality versus today, and that goalpost has been moved so many times. So thoughts on the revised plug-in hybrid X5 and when we will get it? Hopefully soon, but I'm really eager to see that one because I actually really, really like the X5 plug-in hybrid. I think that's one of my favorites in that segment. I like the X5 and the XC90 for very different reasons, but I like them just about equally in this segment here. Ryan's asking about a Grand Sequoia. The answer there so far is no, because there is no longer platform available, and Toyota does not sell enough trucks and enough Sequoias seemingly to justify spending the money on a stretched Sequoia platform. Also, to be honest, unless they gave it an independent rear suspension, I think that would just be bad. The third row headroom and legroom in the Sequoia is not great because of their decision to conjoin the development of Tundra and Sequoia together and the inherent compromises. So I think stretching it just would not fix that inherent core problem. It would just give you a similarly compromised vehicle that's a longer sausage. This is an interesting question. I really am wondering myself what the difference is going to be between the Alfa Romeo and the Hornet. I haven't driven the Alfa yet. I have driven the Hornet, but not for very long. We do have videos of them both, thanks to Brian on the channel earlier. So be sure and check those out. I lean towards Dodge because of its price tag. It's just cheaper, and the dealer network support is going to be better. So I think that's definitely something to factor in there. Let's move along here. Nathaniel is saying Volt. So Bolt with a B. The GM has confusing names. Volt is the plug-in hybrid, the one they don't make anymore. Bolt is the one that's just electric. Go figure. So very strange there. i7, yes, I have driven it, but again, not for very long, so we don't have a video on that one. But I do like the i7, and I kind of like BMW's pragmatic direction with their EV development, where they do have this dual-purpose platform, much like Genesis on some of their EVs. That definitely seems to make sense as far as pragmatism, rather, when developing a vehicle there. Moving along here. Congratulations. Know someone that got a Model 3 and an apartment. They are the few, the proud. When we look at the numbers, it appears that something, or maybe about 5%, something like that, are renters that are buying new EVs. So that is definitely one of the few. Interestingly, I actually do know someone that owns a Model S and also lives in an apartment. So go figure. I mean, someone's out there spending $100,000 on a new EV and doesn't own a home. It does happen. Someone asking here about why some parallel hybrid systems are considerably smoother or rougher than others. So this is actually a very good question. So the smoothest parallel hybrid systems out there don't have transmissions in the traditional sense. So in a Ford classic hybrid system, which would be Escape, the Maverick, that generation of plug-in or hybrid system, the Pacifica plug-in hybrid from Stellantis, from Chrysler, the Volt from General Motors, from Chevy, the Chevy Volt, as well as the Malibu, and all of the Toyota hybrid systems until recently, all operate under basically the same theory of operation. I unfortunately don't have a good way of demonstrating this to you other than attempting to draw on a teeny tiny little pad here. But the basic operation of the system is based around a planetary gear set. So it's a little hard to see here, but we have a sun gear right in the middle. We have planetary gears on the outside, those gears, there's 4 gears there. And then we have a ring gear around the outside there. You can Google this yourself. It's probably the easiest to find some of those Google animations about the hybrid synergy drive system. Those are the easiest ones to find. But all of those other hybrids, same theory of operation. Ford, Chrysler, GM, Toyota, they all use the same patents from PACE. So PACE International developed a lot of this hybrid system. There was a huge lawsuit and suing ensued all around. Ford sued Toyota, Toyota sued Ford, everybody got sued by PACE, blah, blah, blah. Everybody's licensing it from PACE. At any rate, the way this system functions is that the engine is not directly mechanically connected to the wheels, but a big electric motor is. So in Toyota land, they call this MG2. MG2 is directly connected to the wheels. That can power the vehicle electric only in operation. The planetary gear is either connected to the engine or to an electric motor, depending on the slight variation of this system design. And then the other one is connected to the other electric motor. The way this works is the motor and the planetary gear sets can all align, and between the three of them, they can cause one motor to act like a generator unit and send power to the other electric motor, or they can use it to actually mechanically transmit power through this planetary gear set system. Because there are no stepped gears in this system, there are no clutches in this system, power delivery is really, really smooth. And that's why those Toyota hybrid systems are really known for their smoothness and their smooth power delivery. The Honda two-motor system is also very smooth for an entirely different reason. That's very smooth because there is no mechanical connection under a lot of driving situations. And so there are significant advantages to that particular design. Licensing, patents, software design, all of that is definitely a concern with the Toyota hybrid system. Also, the weight of the system tends to be a little bit higher, and you have more motors. So the Toyota hybrid synergy drive system depends on one relatively large and powerful motor, much larger and more powerful than we find in other hybrid systems. So if we take a look, for instance, at a Toyota RAV4 hybrid, MG2 is rated theoretically for just over 100 horsepower. That's actual power output, the way the system is using it. But the motor is generally considered to be good for almost about 200 horsepower if they actually crank the dial all the way up. And MG1 is relatively large as well. It's about an 80, 90 horsepower motor. So collectively, we have a lot of motor going on. If you take a look at, for instance, a Kia hybrid system or a Hyundai hybrid system, they use much smaller, much less expensive motors. And because motors in cars are expensive, even though they have an automatic transmission in there, that's actually probably cheaper than the two-motor system that we find in the Toyota. So you can make it less expensive. The downside is that the software and the interaction of the systems ends up becoming more complex because you have that power going through the transmission. It becomes more difficult to get those transmission shifts as smooth as you might like. You also have the reality that there is greater mechanical loss possible because of the mechanical all-wheel drive setup. And you have slightly lower regenerative braking potential because the motor is not as big. But you have the ability to produce more of them because for the same resources, you can build more transmissions, you can build more electric motors because the electric motors are smaller, etc. So all of that's going on. This is a really excellent question on in-wheel hub motors. So Kelly G is asking, why don't we see more wheel hub motors? Are there any deal-breaking disadvantages on them? The answer is yes. So the answer is unsprung weight. I'll let you do the Googling on unsprung weight and why that's a bad thing, but in essence, unsprung weight can hamper a vehicle's handling and its ride quality. If you have a really heavy wheel that's rolling down the road, it's not going to respond as well to bumps and whoops in the road. It's not going to be as willing to change direction either. So there's certainly some handling downsides to that, which is why in vehicles that have multiple electric motors now, they're inboard with CV joints and drive shafts going out to the wheels because that reduces the unsprung weight and it solves a lot of those issues. It's unlikely that we're going to see any in-wheel hub motors anytime soon. There have been lots of designs that have been toyed with, a lot of prototypes out there, but they just have too many disadvantages really to be seen. The closer things that we're, I think, going to see as far as packaging could be Hyundai and Kia's novel gear set system, where they have a joint that doesn't have the losses of a CV joint, but allows a lot of motion and efficiency to coexist in a non-hub situation, also while moving the motor further outboard, so that way they don't need those really long CV joints and really long drive shafts. That's probably still a few years away from production, but that's probably going to be the soonest thing that we will see. Aside from that, no major companies out there are really spending a huge amount of R&D effort, just because of some of the physics involved in those in-hub motor systems. So let's see here. Moving along here, are we ever going to get a manual transmission in an EV? That's an interesting thought. I would say outside of conversions, probably not. The main reason would be manual transmissions don't make too much sense. You'd need a pretty hefty clutch in there in order to compensate for the massive amount of 0 RPM torque that you get in an electric vehicle. You also don't really need a transmission as much in an electric vehicle, because usually a single ratio is just fine. And if we ever did find a manual transmission in an EV, it would be most logical if it was only 1 or 2 gears, fairly far spread apart. And you probably would only need to engage the other gear at really high speeds, say over 70, over 80 miles an hour, etc. So it just doesn't seem likely that it's going to be a big factor, a big development priority, I would say, for car manufacturers out there. Moving along here, Nathaniel's asking, why do we say stitched goods in the interior instead of identifying if it's real leather or fake leather? I don't know. People have just been asking for less clarification and more clarification on other things. That's definitely something we can talk about internally. Some manufacturers don't say necessarily at launch whether it's real or not. So sometimes we find out later. This is kind of a weird side thing, is that oftentimes when we're driving a vehicle to a launch event, the designers are not there. They're off somewhere else, so we can't ask the question about whether or not it's real leather. Oftentimes, real leather is very limited in format, so you'll only find it in expensive vehicles, or oddly enough in Stellantis vehicles, because they've just been pretty aggressive at putting leather in dashboards of pretty much everything, all the way down to Chrysler 300, etc. So it does kind of vary there. Manufacturers are not good at telling people what is real and what is not. I know I've seen videos where they've said that Subaru Outback has leather on the dash. It absolutely does not. But Subaru really gave mixed messages at the launch of the Outback, where I can see why people got confused, because at the launch event they said it was, and a bunch of people scratched their heads and went, hang on a minute, is it really? And then it took us about a month to find out for sure. Then they came back and said, oh, sorry, my bad, it's imitation leather. So occasionally those sorts of things do happen. So Swing Low is asking my take on Hertz dumping EVs for ICE. Go back to the beginning of this video when you have a chance later in the day, or you can check out our Facebook page. The decision by Hertz seems to be driven more on, well, let me rephrase this. Seems to be driven more on some of the realities of cost of repair, which they should have known about to begin with. So this is bad business by Hertz. Less on customer demand, that we have really seen true customer demand, but also there wasn't the customer demand for EVs at the beginning when they did it. They just wanted 20,000 new cars, and that was what they were able to get. So they just took whatever they could get. Remember, this is also the era where Hertz was buying used cars. So Hertz was literally grabbing anything that wasn't nailed down. Hertz true demand for EVs is difficult to divine for a few reasons. The bulk of these EVs were originally sent to the ride-sharing fleet, to Uber and Lyft drivers that were renting cars from Hertz. Then they ended up getting moved after that into the regular fleet because the repair costs were very high. Hertz is self-insured, and they were doing loss damage waivers on all of these Uber and Lyft vehicles. So they get damaged in fender benders, door dings, whatever. They brought them back, and then they had to fix them. or they just didn't fix them and they jammed them in the regular rental car fleet, where a lot of customers were, going down the rental car aisle, looking at them and going, well, I don't want to drive a Tesla Model Y with 60,000 miles on the clock and a door that doesn't open, which is literally what I ended up with in Seattle in a Model Y recently, just because I absolutely wanted one. So I walked down the line, found the Model Y that was there, and kid you not, one of the doors just would not open. It had been in an accident. You could see that the door was off, could not open the door. At any rate, so we don't know what true demand honestly is because they didn't give it a solid go. Also, in some areas, you had to wait if you wanted the Model 3 or Model Y. Some people were being forced into them. Some people felt like they were being forced into them because they were the cheapest EV available on the lot, and then they had buyer's remorse. It's really difficult to tell exactly how that was going to go down. But the bottom line now is the repair costs for them are high because they did stupid things with them. They somehow were surprised that a BMW priced vehicle would have BMW priced repairs on it. So they paid about $65,000, as we understand it, average transaction price for these Teslas that they have. Remember that in 2021, the Model 3 and Model Y were significantly more expensive than they are now. They also paid rack rate for them. So lots and lots of bad business decisions, I think, ultimately on the Hertz side of things. I can't honestly blame any of that on Tesla. Tesla just made out like a bandit by selling some Model 3s and Model Ys that weren't moving. Moving along here, there should be pushback to manufacturers regarding spare tires. I had to drive on the spare for a couple days to correct a replacement tire. I personally agree, but I keep being told by new car manufacturers that customers don't seem to be interested in them, or customers would prefer the safety and security of the roadside assistance, I guess, which has never really satisfied me. Because maybe it's just because I live in the country and it would take AAA a really long time to get to me, and then I would still be without a car. So I'm not clear how the whole AAA thing is always an answer, since you still can't get where you want to go. Because it's not like I want to go to grandma's house and my tire went flat. Now I call AAA and they take me to grandma's house and then take me back home again. That's not a thing. Whereas you could still do that with a spare tire, and then on Monday go get a good tire for your flat tire issue. But then I also know people that absolutely positively will not change their own tire. They just, they have a flat and they call someone and they get towed wherever they get towed, and they just somehow magically live without a car for a while. I don't know. I don't understand it. But at any rate, moving along to some of our last questions. We'll try and hurry things along here since we do have an end to this. Am I a button or a screen man? I do love me some buttons. I like both. I like big screens and I like the choice. I have to say that if I were to choose an interface that speaks to me, I would say that by and large, Honda, Hyundai and Kia, Genesis, the Stellantis portfolio of companies, to a little bit of a lesser extent BMW, they generally work well for me because they have a reasonable amount of choices, different ways to interact with the system. Actually, Nissan and Infiniti I should include on that list as well. So, if you have a track forward backward button on the steering wheel and on the center console and in the screen, then you have the option to choose what you prefer, what speaks to you at the time. I tend to prefer interacting with climate control as little as possible. I tend to use the automatic climate control, and I'm just fine with that. So I really don't care where those buttons are, but volume sliders, track forward, backward buttons, they should be physical controls on the car somewhere. Also, defogger and defroster, those would be my exception for the touch screeny things. I would rather that there be a physical button for defogger and defroster. I don't really care about the headlight controls. They can be in the touch screen like General Motors is doing. Don't care about that. Auto high beams, if the car has it, that should be some easy to switch control, something like that. If you are going to have touch sliders in a car, manufacturers out there, they should be illuminated, not like the Volkswagen Atlas that we have this week, where at night I had a passenger that kept trying to rest their finger on the dashboard while they're interacting with the touchscreen. And I kept saying, stop doing it. You're adjusting the climate control. Every time this person was on there, the climate control was going up 5 degrees and down 10 degrees and whatever, because unknowingly they were resting their finger on the slider, and it wasn't their fault. It's Volkswagen's fault for not making the control illuminated. And then the next day they were like, oh, yeah, that's a slider control, isn't it? I'm like, yeah, that's what I kept saying. That's not a finger rest. That's where the thing is. So I think the button minimalist thing has gone a little bit too far in some cars, and we can really see that because some manufacturers have actually decided to shift gears and move back the other way. Volkswagen has said they're putting buttons back. Thank the Lord. We don't know what other companies will do necessarily, but we have seen in some prototype and preliminary designs that, at least for the moment, the Hyundai and Kia group of companies seem to be sticking with the buttons. They tried to merge things a little bit too closely together for a while with the EV6 and some of those related car companies where they had a button bank that changed functions. I'm hoping that they go back from that. It's a little bit too early to tell how customer feedback will affect them. But, we have seen that the European car companies have started to dial this thing back, or at least improve the interface. Volvo is not going back to the button bank, but they have really improved some of the button interactions, on-screen imitation button interactions, I should say. Tesla, I think, really drove this button game forward. And part of the thing that's intriguing when you look at new car design and customer surveys and customer interest, et cetera, is that there are definite trends in the automotive industry. Car companies are definitely looking to see what other car companies are doing and what works for those car companies and doesn't work for others. So button minimalism was definitely driven by Tesla. Button minimalism, however, was not necessarily driven by consumer demand. Button minimalism was driven by Tesla's desire to reduce manufacturing costs and reduce the costs of their cars. Customers were definitely interested in that part, but specifically removing buttons, removing instrument clusters, not having a heads-up display, customers weren't running out and saying, you know what I don't need? I don't need those buttons. That direction was going on there. These companies followed them down the rabbit hole. Then customer surveys came back and they said, hey, we want some buttons back. This is where I will say JD Power really comes into the conversation, which is something that's, again, controversial with viewers. But JD Power and the IQS, one of the most frequently misunderstood surveys out there, is a lot about customer satisfaction and a lot about this exact question. So IQS asks a lot about button placement and were the features explained? How do you like the functionality of this feature and that feature? And this is where Hyundai and Kia have made great strides. And this is part of why Hyundai and Kia, and to a little bit of a lesser extent, Stellantis, kind of hops and bops in that chart. But the prime reason that Hyundai and Kia are tops of IQS is because they love this feedback cycle. The way that JD Power works is they send out the survey. It's anonymous. It spreads a very wide net. It goes to registered owners of new cars. They go all 50 states, everywhere, every major metropolitan area. So very broad reaching survey. It's not just subscribers, not just whatever. And then they pay them $1 to fill out the survey. Then they collect the data. Then they go to the manufacturer and they go, so do you want to know why you sucked? That's basically how it goes. Or do you want to know why you did well? If you want to know, you got to pay us. So it's not that the manufacturer is paying for the ranking on the survey, but every manufacturer that I know of, Tesla's the one exception that won't talk about this, but most likely Tesla is buying the data as well. Every mainline manufacturer buys the full data from JD Power. That's how it functions. So Jaguar Land Rover is not paying JD Power to be at the bottom of the heap, and they're all paying the same rate for the data set here, essentially. But what they do with the data, that's entirely up to them. Hyundai and Kia love taking the data and going, what can we do to improve our ranking in this survey? And then be all proud of ourselves and pat ourselves on the back that we got a better score. So if that answer is change the button bank, they'll change the button bank. And we definitely see that in their cars. This is part of why year 2 or year 3 of a new product from Hyundai and Kia, they will make relatively notable changes on interior functionality components. They'll change software packages. They'll tweak the way this or that is done in the car. They may make button changes and button panel changes, etc. The argument for this is you as a customer get a better product. So yes, it is sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy on this process. You buy the data, you use the data, you get a better score, circles all around and around and around, but you still benefit as a consumer. Just don't assume that IQS is reliability, because it's not. The likelihood of something going wrong in the first 90 days is very, very, very low on pretty much everything. And IQS asks an awful lot of customer satisfaction questions. So it is not a reliability survey. Initial quality is a weird thing to call it, unless you're really just talking about fit and finish, etc. That is factored into that. But yeah, useful study, useful to the consumer, but not reliability. So technically, Jeff is asking thoughts on EV9 pricing, and this will be our last question. So sorry about that. I think it's priced a little too high, and they love offering the 3,750 rebate already, and inventory counts rising. I don't think I'm alone. I am unsure how that is going to play out. We are in an odd situation right now where the tax credit situation is a problem, not just because of country of manufacturer, but also because of the AGI limits, the adjusted gross income limits, as well as the MSRP limits on cars. And so lots of vehicles are being excluded from these tax credits. EV9 is built in the US or will be built in the US, I should clarify, because currently those EV9s sitting on the dealer lots, those won't get the tax rebate because they're not built in the US. EV9 initially is being imported from Korea. So some of this could have to do with where the EV9 is coming from. And I don't know if it's going to get tax credit treatment later. I know you're correction here for people who are just listening to this. Jeff was asking about the 3,750 rebate, not the tax credit. It will likely qualify for some tax credit treatment shortly, but only when production moves to North America. It's going to be built in, I believe, their West Point, Georgia factory, if I recall correctly. At any rate, the rest of it is tricky. The rebate part, I can sort of understand because of the relative rebate and pricing and tax structure treatment that we find in some of the competition. So the Rivian R1S, if you get certain versions, it looks like we will be getting a tax credit on that. And that could potentially drive pricing down. We don't know where EX90 is going to land here, but EX90 is, I would say, pretty well priced for the market. It's under $80,000. It will also be built in the United States. So theoretically, it could qualify for some or all of that tax treatment, assuming the battery manufacturing is harmonized to the right spot. So I just don't know. I am a little bit more cautious on the range figures, I think, of the base EV9. I think that could be why some are failing to move. I am interested. It's early days yet, so it's hard to tell exactly how that will go. Inventory should logically be piling up in a normal world. If we're thinking of EV9 as a traditional car that we're trying to sell in normal dealer fashion, logically dealers should have 30 to 90 days inventory on dealer lots. So that way the customer has the options to choose from, the vehicles that they want to pick. So in general terms, I would say having a manufacturer average 3 months of inventory on anything on a dealer lot should not be considered a problem in North America. If we're talking about Europe, that is a big bad problem. Something went very, very wrong if you have 3 months inventory on a dealer lot. But for North America, should be considered the normal times. That's back to normal inventory, normal buying situations where a customer expects to be able to go to the dealer, find a selection of colors, find a selection of trims, and then buy one right off the dealer lot and walk away with it. Are we at that point yet? We just don't know. And, are we at a point where families that really want a big boxy 3-row thing are ready to buy an EV and are ready to live with that reality? I would say we just don't know the answer to that question yet necessarily either, especially on higher priced vehicles where the cost of borrowing is a concern. If Kia was doing 0% financing instead of a rebate, I think that would be a better benefit to sales. But some of this is, I think, a little bit early days. We also don't quite know the geographic spread of where all these EV9s are going necessarily. It does appear that Hyundai is being a bit better about selling EVs as far as volume and being able to move them in the right markets, etc. So when we see the next Ioniq, the 3-row Ioniq, will this get better? I would expect, based on what we've seen with EV6 versus Ioniq 5, I would not be surprised if the next Ioniq, the 3-row model, sold better than EV9. That could be likely. It does not necessarily appear that Telluride sales are rubbing off on the EV9 or Telluride interest yet. But that said, I am driving the EV9 next week. Finally, it seems like the entire world has driven the EV9 so far, but I will be driving it next week. So hopefully we can get some more of the answers to this next week, and then perhaps over the next maybe 6 months. We don't know the exact start of production for EV9 in the United States, but it could adjust pricing for 2025, and it likely could adjust the effective pricing to the consumer. If EV9 sales move to the United States and they play their cards right and it gets half the tax credit initially and then moves on to a complete tax credit, say after a year, then that could bode really well for future EV9 sales. But I think at this point in time, it's a little bit difficult to say. So be sure and let everybody know what you think about that down there in the comment section. If you are watching this later, if you're watching this on Facebook or on YouTube, go and find us on the opposite platform there. And be sure and stay tuned for some of those upcoming videos on the soon side. We are driving a whole lot, actually. We're driving videos coming up. We have Telluride, the 2024 TLX Atlas and Atlas Cross Sport. Finally, the EV9, the Lexus GX, the Ford Explorer, that would be the refreshed one, the QX60, the new G70, the Honda Prologue, the CX-70 is going to be a first look. And then we're going to have a retrospective review of the Dodge Durango, because the Durango is going to live on for another 2 model years in the United States. So with all of that, I hope everybody has a lovely weekend and a lovely Friday night, and we'll see all of you next week.